I would like to greet the panelists, which will present the possibilities for investment in Slovenia and the potential of our economical environment. I made already some introduction during or at the end of the previous panel, but now I would like to welcome here the microphone, the director of the state agency for promoting foreign investment, Mr. Steniak. Please.
Thank you. Dear ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to be here today. Nevertheless, we are not the least if we are the last. Not only big companies, but also numerous small and medium-sized foreign companies set up their operations in Slovenia and contribute to higher employment rate, knowledge transfer, exports, and in the long run, also to the promotion of Slovenia worldwide. Companies and investors recognize Slovenia through educated and loyal business-oriented workforce and business environment with perfect geographical position on intersection of 5th and 10th European transport corridor with famous and good business links with neighboring countries. The public agency of Republic of Slovenia for Entrepreneurship and Foreign Investment, JAPTI, acts as a one-stop shop for the foreign investors and offers free of charge services to foreign investors. We assist them in the decision-making processes of choosing a country, a sector of invest, and we provide business and market informations, organize fact-finding missions, links to industry and local authorities, offer support when establishing a company in Slovenia, and in later stages we offer also aftercare support. JAPTI additionally offers financial incentives for foreign investors when launching projects in manufacturing, services, and R&D projects in Slovenia. Over the last 5 years, we have supported 60 different projects with total financial incentives of 30 million euros, which have created 3,300 new jobs, and total investment of 180 millions. JAPTI has significantly and positively influenced with the promotion and activities, services for investors, and with financial incentives, the growth of FDI in Slovenia. JAPTI is also conducting the very research, yearly research among established foreign investors in order to monitor the pursued Slovene business climate. Results show that foreign investors would like to eliminate the same problems which also WEF and IMD researchers have pointed to. There is room for improvement of the Slovene business climate and environment. Implementing the necessary changes would reflect a more competitive and attractive place for foreign investors. Now we are facing a crisis situation in which everybody knows what is wrong and nobody knows what's right. And I can state from the position of JAPTI director in this moment, by now in Slovenia, Slovenia will not be cheaper again. So all criticism in Slovenia will not help us a lot in creating a positive picture of Slovenia in the eyes of the FDI investors. As a Slovenian businessman once said, Slovenes are so full of criticism about themselves Not because the situation in Slovenia is so bad, but because the Slovenians are so ambitious. So I would like to address to potential investors to Slovenia. Don't listen to us. Listen to the satisfied investors from abroad. And I will finish with that, and I will pass the floor to Mr. Skočir, who will lead the panel. Thank you very much.
Dear Mr. Plesteniak, thank you for yielding the floor. I know it's our last session. I believe you're already tired, but you know, like at all dinners, desserts always come at the end. However, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you on behalf of the organizers of this roundtable, so on behalf of IAPTI, the Public Agency of the Republic of Slovenia for Entrepreneurship and Foreign Investments. My name is Matej Skočir. I'm the head of FDI division of IAPTI, and I will be moderating the next panel. And the topic, as you can see on the slide, is a very interesting one. Well, we've put it as a Slovene competitiveness as seen from the eyes of foreign direct investors. And the whole panel will be about what are the opportunities, what are the next steps, and what are the next prospects, especially in the field of FDI. But just a brief introduction in the situation in Slovenia. Well, currently, the FDI are seen as one of the crucial factors that could help Slovenia to get out of the financial and economic crisis. And in fact, indeed, yeah, FDI can have a positive impact on the national economy by bringing either new technology, diversifying the structure of the national economy, creating new jobs. And if we take a look on the companies with foreign and mixed capital in Slovenia, we'll find out that on average, they show a better economic performance than an average Slovene company. But on the other hand, FDI stock, so FDI stock measured as a percentage of GDP, is in comparison to other CE countries quite low. So for the moment, it is set at 33% of GDP. If we compare that to the other CE countries, for example, Slovak Republic, Czech, Hungary, Poland, those figures are much, much, much higher, above 50, above 60%. And also if you take a look at the figure on the EU level, that figure is 45, 47, so still lacking around 15 percentage points beyond the EU level. But also the figures, if we take a look at the figures on the world scale, so what's happening on the world level, so FDI flows are recovering. They reached the peak in 2007, 2008. There was a substantial fall down in 2009, but those figures are recovering. So they are on the level of 2006, 2007. Slovenia is currently in need of capital. So we wonder whether whether FDI are an opportunity for Slovenia. Will Slovenia be able to catch other developed countries in terms of FDI? What needs to be done, and what are the future expectations of Slovenia? And we will address these questions with our distinguished guests at the panel. I'd like to take just a few minutes to introduce our guests to you. So on my left-hand side, Mr. Matija Rojec. Mr. Rojec is an economist by profession. He's a research professor at the Faculty of Social Sciences. His main topic of research is FDI and transition issues. He has been involved in FDI, EU accession and transition-related projects and consultancy missions in Slovenia and other countries of the Central Europe and the Southeastern Europe. Then we have, on the other side, Mr. Simon Mastnak. Mr. Mastnak is an independent financial consultant providing capital market services to local and international companies. In the past, he has worked for 6 years at Ljubljana Stock Exchange, where he was a director of business development and marketing. In the middle, we have Mr. Peter Stanovnik, a professor at the Faculty of Economics. He has worked as a researcher, director, and also the partner of one of the leading economic research organizations in Slovenia, that's the Institute of Economic Research. He's still a partner at the same institute in the preparation of the World Competitiveness Yearbook and the Global Competitiveness Report. So, Mr. Stanovnik, I'd like to start with you. At the institute, you are conducting a special survey. That's the survey about the competitiveness that's based on the IMD and WEF methodology. Both studies refer to the competitiveness of different nations. Slovenia is on that list as well, but let's say since I think 2006, 2007, we face a little bit negative trend in our position. What has happened? What went wrong? How do you see Slovenia's position? And how does that affect the attracting of potential foreign investors? Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to everybody. Well, I am supposed to tell you a few words about this competitiveness, which could be tackled or analyzed from different points of view, from the point of products, companies, or national economy. And as Mr. Skočir said, we are doing a survey with Swiss institutes, IMD, and World Economic Forum about ranking every year, about ranking our economy in the World Competitiveness surveys. These are different methodologies. I would not go deep into the Michael Porter's methodology, how to measure this, but I would like to say that we collect about 300 data. Part of them are hard data, statistical, official data, and part of them are survey data. And on the basis of this compilation, these institutes in Switzerland, they make every year special ranking. And on this ranking, it is true that what Mr. Skočir said, that we have a certain decline, because 5 years ago, Slovenia was in the 32nd position on the world scale, according to the IMD. And now, this year, we have 51st position. That means that we have dropped about 20 places. So what are the main reasons? Well, the main reason, of course, is decline in economic growth, which happens mostly in 2009, minus 8%, which was not compensated in the next years. So there are other reasons. Because you are financial experts, then I will maybe to indicate some financial reasons for this. That means availability of the capital, foreign capital. That also, in this crisis, also availability and affordability of domestic financial services. Then we have a problem of the local equity market. Probably Mr. Mastnak will tell more about this. The companies have huge problems with the access to loans. Then we have also very small capacity for venture capital, which is also important for high-tech products, and also our exports in high-tech is not so good as some would wish it, or some comparable countries do it. So we have only about 6–7% of total export, which is not small. As you know, our export is about more than $20 billion, 20 billion euros. What is for the country with 2 million people, which is really a good performance. But of course, there are other weaknesses, some strengths and weaknesses. We have relatively good infrastructure regarding the scientific, technological road infrastructure, maybe with the exception of railways, so that we have, in this sense, very good position. So in this sense, in overall ranking in infrastructure, we are again among the top 25 countries. But the problem is government efficiency. The problem is business efficiency, and also economic performance in the last 3 years because of this public finance problem, and also because of the institutional framework, which is not so friendly for domestic or for foreign investors. So then maybe we can later go into details about this.
We'll keep it that, yeah. Mr. Rojec, you're more or less in your career, you have been always focused on the strategic foreign direct investments. And as far as I know, you are also conducting a special survey among companies with foreign mixed capital. And of course, you're asking them what are the main motives and what are the main obstacles of investing in Slovenia? Where do you see what are the main advantages, or let's say, where do you see would be the main disadvantages of the Slovene business environment?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. Before tackling this issue, I would just like to say that, of course, like any other country, we are not satisfied with the level. We are not happy with the level of FDI in the country, but still one must say that in the period from 2005 to 2011, the stock of inward FDI more than doubled. So some things happened in spite of the fact that we would like to have more FDI. This is also, we say that the importance of foreign enterprises for the economy is low, that we are not happy with it. Still, one must know that enterprises with foreign equity are responsible, with strategic foreign investors are responsible for something about 40% of Slovenian export and some 40% of the import. So these are not low figures anyhow. Maybe not so good is somehow a geographical distribution of foreign investors, because almost half of all FDI comes from Austria. I don't want to say that this is bad, but of course this means that we did not profit from our chances to attract FDI from other countries. If you have only something like 600 million euros from Germany, this is really a low figure. And this high share of Austria also shows that FDI in Slovenia is more or less a spontaneous process, you know. And since they are neighbors, they know the situation more. They are more willing to take risks and more willing to come than investors which know less about the country. Now, if we talk about the motivation, I think we should really distinguish between FDI in manufacturing, in production activities, and in services. In services, it's like everywhere else, you have the local market motivation. So foreign investors are coming because of the local market. In the production, in the manufacturing FDI, this of course is not the case, because no production for 2 million people is economical. So they are coming for establishing export-oriented production here. And if you want to see what is the export-to-sales ratio of foreign investment enterprises in Slovenia, it's more than 70%. So on average, more than 70% of the production of foreign enterprises in Slovenia goes to export. For instance, Revoz, who is a factory of Renault in Novo Mesto, I think produced their production for the Slovenian market is only 1 day. They do the cars for Slovenian market in 1 day. For all the rest goes to exports. If we look more precisely at the motivation, I will base this on the questionnaire survey among foreign investors, which we do. There are 5 motives which stand out quite clearly. The first is that foreign investors want to establish some kind of long-term cooperation with the entities which they have here. The second is the quality labor force, not the price of the labor force. The third motivation is they want to increase the market share in Slovenia. The fourth motivation is that they come here to try to establish efficient production for exports in Slovenia. As I said, something like 70% of the sales goes abroad. And then most of them also mention good geographical position. And all these motives are very frequently linked to another, let's say, motive, which is that they invest in Slovenia because there was a good acquisition opportunity. So they were able to acquire a local company for a relatively good price. Now, on the other hand, of course, there are these barriers and obstacles to FDI. As I said, we are not happy with the level of FDI, and I think foreign investors are even less happy with the investment climate. But first of all, I should say that, of course, foreign investors on the former level, they enjoy full national treatment. No doubt about it. We are members of the EU. We are a member of the OECD, and the rules there are clear. So on formal level, there is no problem. Feeling that sometimes that Slovenia is not friendly to FDI comes out of two factors. The first are privatization deals, and in fact, I must say that in the past. There was a number of privatization deals which didn't succeed. So the state put some companies on sale, but then it was not realized for this or other reasons. And in a number of cases, it really comes a bad feeling out of it at the end. So I think this is the first reason. The second reason is that, in fact, our investment climate and our business environment have some negative characteristics, like problems with construction permits, problems with registering property, getting credits, and in some cases enforcing contracts. And when you compare, foreign investors do compare Slovenian investment environment with with other countries. And in a number of instances, they in fact get the impression that this environment is unfriendly to them. It is unfriendly, but it's to the same level unfriendly to local firms. So I think in this case, the main message would be, of course, we should improve this investment climate. On a more exact level, again, if we go to this questionnaire survey, so what foreign investors feel are the main barriers or the main shortcomings of the Slovenian business environment. On the first place, they say high taxes. The second are payment arrears. The third are relatively high labor costs. The fourth are difficulty in laying off the employees, so relatively rigid labor market. And the fifth are inefficient judiciary. If you look at any domestic surveys of what local firms think about investment environment in Slovenia, they would quote exactly the same problems. So by reducing these problems, by eliminating these problems, not only foreign investors would profit in Slovenia, but also local companies.
Just a short sub-question. What would you recommend to abolish or to improve immediately?
Listen, what I would say, I mean, in the last 20 years, I saw a lot of government proposals and so on and so on, but I think that maybe the easiest way or the most efficient way to reduce some of these administrative barriers would be to establish some business zones by the state, and then really use these business zones as a economic policy tool. So to enable foreign and domestic investors, of course, to go in these zones, to establish company there fastly, and in this way they could avoid all the administrative problems, I think. And in this would also put pressure on administration in general.
Okay, Mr. Mastnak, to you. Well, Mr. Rojec mentioned also portfolios of the stock exchange. You have been working for several years at Ljubljana Stock Exchange, so I guess you got quite a good practical insight into the functioning of the Slovene capital market. Among our guests, there are many representatives of the National Associations of Shareholders that I guess would be interested also in the portfolio investment. What would you recommend? What would you suggest to them? How do you see the Slovene capital market, the pitfalls, the advantages?
I think this is going to be the part of being Slovenian being too critical of themselves. Yeah, I've been working on capital markets in Slovenia now for 13 years. I've been at the stock exchange for 6 years, and I left it five years ago, so just before the crisis started. I've been involved in organizing first roadshows that Ljubljana Stock Exchange ever did in London, so I met a lot of portfolio investors. And this was the time just before the MiFID directive was implemented. So our discussions were mainly about money laundering laws being too strict in Slovenia, then clearing and settlement being way different than they were used to, trading hours being much shorter than in most of the stock exchanges in the world. But, you know, when you look at it, these all are problems, of course. But the main problem of Ljubljana Stock Exchange and of Slovenian capital markets will always be that we have just so little shares to offer to investors. When you're a stock exchange, you basically compete with all other stock exchanges in the world. Every investor can trade with every share in the world, more or less. And in Ljubljana, we have about 10 shares that we call liquid. What I mean that we called liquid, well, the whole market turnover, daily turnover, amounts to 1.5 million. So if the whole market would be a share, it would not be considered a liquid share by MiFID directive. And how come? Of course, Slovenia as a small country will never be able to have thousands and thousands of large companies that could be traded as on New York Stock Exchange. But even if we compare ourselves with similar transitional economies, having just 10 companies, and all these 10 companies are large privatized companies from the past. Not even one new Slovenian company is at the stock market and can be considered a prime Slovenian company. I think that the main reasons are basically political. The stock exchange or the capital market has never been seen in Slovenia as a real force of economic growth. It was more or less just a playground for privatization. So it was a playground for companies and tycoons and other businesses that try to sort of buy other companies or to get larger shares in companies. But the whole financial industry never really got developed. Because there's so little trading, obviously, the financial advisors, the investment banking, now all of this is just in an infancy phase. We have no structured products on our shares, nothing like that. And on the other hand, of course, because of all the companies got their financing from the banks, the investor relations side was very poorly developed as well. Ljubljana Stock Exchange made a lot of efforts into this, started webcasts, started roadshows, did a lot of things that on, let's say, normal markets, investment banks would be doing. But still, even after 10 years of work on this field, we can say that we are lacking behind the developed market. And I don't see this changing until the real political will exist in Slovenia, that things have to change, that it's not really okay that the government holds directly 23% of the companies traded on Ljubljana Stock Exchange, plus indirectly through two banks, we could say about 50% of the whole economy is still in the hands of the government. Until the political sides will agree that it's not really good for the economy, that every little risk that exists in the economy goes through the banks. Why? Because we have no private equity funds, or very little of them. We have no hedge funds. We have no funding possibility for the companies except from the banking sector. And of course, when the crisis started, every little loan that was every little company that got in the difficulties of returning the loans, that showed in the balance sheets of the banks. So it's not really that surprisingly, knowing that, why Slovenia, with such a basically good microeconomic picture, if you look at it from the static perspective, has such a huge pressures now on financial markets. Why we cannot even raise 250 million euros of T-bills recently. That's, of course, down to the political picture, down to the political will to change things. And until we get that, I'm afraid things will not change.
Okay, I'll continue with you. Well, you've mentioned the political reasons and the political wills, but there is a huge debate now at the parliamentary procedure, governmental procedure, and the discussion goes into the idea of privatization of the state-owned companies, so state-owned assets. Well, now we have the idea in the parliamentary procedure of drafting a sovereign holding act, so Slovenski državni holding, which would have, of course, the bad assets, which would also cover the state-owned companies, etc. How would you comment? These proposals go in the direction of changing things, or?
Well, I am obviously a huge advocate of privatization. I think that the government really should privatize part of the economy. What I think not only this proposal, but the whole situation really lacks is any strategy. Where do political parties, where does the government see Slovenia in 10 or 20 years? Of course, it's the easiest way is to start selling the companies. But I think what we have to have in Slovenia is some sort of consensus between the political parties, the trade unions, and all other stakeholders. What do we want from this country to become? Let me just give you one example. Do you remember 5.5 years ago, Slovenia was actually the first transitional economy that entered Euro. A couple of years before that, we were in the first wave of transitional economies that entered European Union itself. What does that mean? That means that while we had Maastricht and other criteria that some international entity put upon us, we are basically the European champions in getting to this criteria. We were the first one to get into Euro. But 5.5 years ago, when we entered the Euro, we sort of entered into a space that was just total blankness. Our political parties cannot agree on anything anymore. So there's no consensus to move forward in any direction. Even the most basic things are always argued. So the proposal that is now in the National Assembly is basically the same. I can, of course, understand, and I can see in other General Assemblies the similar things, that of course the political parties will argue and have different opinions. But the problem in Slovenia is that there is no consensus even in the most critical ways. So even now that you can read the newspapers that Troika is at the doors of Slovenia, even now the political parties cannot agree even on the most common things. And that I think is our major problem. And the privatization, that's very clear. The privatization has to be done. If we want to finance our budget in the next year, it is that critical. For instance, 3 companies that are mentioned most commonly, Triglav, Petrol, and Telekom, probably they will be worth about 2 billion euros in the market together. If you borrow 2 billion euros and yield to maturity is about 7%, you can calculate how much money our budget needs and doesn't have at the moment to do this. But again, the biggest problem for me would be to sell these companies to budget the consumption, which we will do if we don't have a strategic plan. That's the biggest problem. We will definitely jeopardize the future of this country so that we can live better for a year or two. And that's not a good thing to do. So what I think it's necessary before going into privatization, have a clear strategy. What this country wants to do, and then privatize those companies that are in the line with this strategy.
Mr. Stanovnik, Mr. Rojec, your comment on that?
Well, I would like to say that I completely agree with what the colleague said. Of course, it's the problem how the economic policy is designed in the coalition government, where there is inside of the government there are many problems which are not leading to the consensus. And I think that besides financial economic policy, there is also the problem how to raise, how to increase some public investment to increase the demand, which is still stagnating. So that means in order to spur, to support, to foster economic growth, we must have some incentives on the macro level and also on the micro level to end with this stagnation and to start economic growth at least in the year 2014. Next year, I don't think that there will be growth, any growth. Then there are some another partial policies which are needed to implement, not only reform of pensions and of course reform of labor market, but there is also reform of our educational system, which is very rigid. And I think that in order to foster the collaboration between academic sector, universities, public institutes, and business sector, in order to innovate, to increase the efficiency of innovation system, we need to also to make reform of the public institutions. So this is one part which is, I think, can be made relatively quickly. The problem is also the values, attitudes of the management of politicians, which cannot be changed overnight. And I think this is also the question, again, the question of our educational system, secondary school and high schools.
Mr. Rojec, you were always, researching the transition issues, etc.
Yeah, okay. I will
the same situation 20 years ago. How do you see it now?
Well, I will be very short. Definitely, politics is the main problem in this country. It is the reason for all the problems, and without some kind of political solutions, nothing will happen. But as far as privatization is concerned, now again these discussions reappear. Maybe 5 years ago we thought that privatization is ended, but now it's obviously that we have to privatize everything, according to my opinion. And if you listen to these discussions now, it's like, to me, a flashback. I mean, the discussions among academics and other people are the same as 20 years ago. It is, and I think this is this really is a joke. So if you would ask me what should be privatized, everything should be privatized except maybe some infrastructure facilities and some firms which really do public services. The first thing, according to me, which should be sold is this Nova Ljubljanska banka, because this is the focus of all the political interests and of political problems. And since Ljubljanska banka also now has stakes, has equity in a number of firms, privatization of Nova Ljubljanska banka would also mean privatization of these firms, or at least that these firms will be put on the market. So Simon said, yes, I mean, we need a strategy. I think that if we will wait for the strategy, nothing will happen. So we should say, let's sell everything what can be privatized, and then in the move we can see. But as I see the situation now, I think these discussions are all too late. What to privatize, fast or not? I think that this discussion is over. I mean, we will have to privatize everything, and everything will be privatized, because there's no other solution.
Mr. Mastnak, banks, part of the deal, part of the package. How do you see that? Mr. Rojec mentioned Nova Ljubljanska banka.
Well, I think as we have representatives of small shareholders associations, probably the main question is how it will be privatized. And one of the problems in Slovenia is that our financial industry is very poorly developed. So that means, for instance, pension funds, which are the drivers of privatization, for instance, in Poland and were so in Austria before that, and other similar countries. In Slovenia, because of the legislation, all they do is basically take the money out of their clients and put it into either the government bonds or into bank deposits. And that's because if they put it into the shares and the share lost value, they would have to put their own money into the company, so compensate their clients for the loss. And that is calculated monthly. So basically, we don't have institutional investors. Investment funds are in their infancy. There are a couple of insurance companies, banks, but as you know, Basel III is coming, and they are not really that keen on investing into IPOs in Slovenian country right now. So that means that the government only considers strategic, so the sale of companies to strategic investors. In my opinion, that could kill even that little hope of capital markets that we have right now. If you remember, I mentioned that we have 10 companies that we consider liquid. Most of the privatizations that we are talking about comes from these 10 companies. So if we sell 5 or 6 companies, then the daily turnover of Slovenian capital market would be €500,000 or something like that. So I think that the grocery market in London makes more turnover per day. So I think that one of the important elements that nobody talks about at the moment is what the privatization will mean for the capital markets. I think that the financial intermediaries are not raising this debate because they will get some money if as they will advise M&As and so on. But what will happen in 2 or 3 or 4 years? There will be no more small shareholders in Slovenia altogether if that happens. Because, of course, the small privatized companies are not growing that fast and are still very much dependent on banks and will not do IPOs in the next 2 or 3 years. So that is the main question. Coming back to you with what to do with banks, I think that's very, very clear. First of all, we'll have to pull away all the bad loans out of them, so that they will have a balance sheet that will be even that anyone will be able to evaluate. For instance, one information just recently, a banka tried to do a capital increase. It is a stock-quoted company, and they proposed a price of 22% of book value, and only 1% of proposed capital was sold. So you can see that the main problem is that nobody really knows what is in the balance sheet of the bank or how to evaluate what it is in the balance sheet. So this is the first step, of course, bad bank. And the second step will be then to sell what will remain. But unfortunately, if you look at the macroeconomic situation, if you look at the whole banking situation in Europe, I'm afraid we will be very, very disappointed at the price that we will get for even the banks after we put a lot of money into them. You know, because if you're an owner of a bank in a country that is facing a bailout, that's not really a good situation to be in. So I think that the reality of the situation is first the bad bank, then the recapitalization of bank, then third, selling of the banks at a really, really low price, unfortunately. But there's no other scenarios because we lost all the better options along the way.
Okay. Well, you've all said that there's also a lack of political will, and there are also political reasons. So I try to put you in a different role. So suddenly you are in the role of the Minister of Finance. How would you do that? How would you approach?
Look, I think from everything that is happening in the world at the moment, it's very clear that what will decide in the next 10 years which country grows faster or no is the access to capital. banks will no longer be able to finance the economies the way that they used to in the continental Europe and especially in Slovenia. So if we don't have a capital market that is able to move the finances from the population, from the companies to the fast-growing companies, then it's very clear that the Slovenian economy will not grow the way we want to. And of course, as was mentioned before, doing this kind of environment means the same from Slovenian capital and for the foreign capital, because we are not able to attract even Slovenian capital. Slovenian capital actually invests outside Slovenia. Obviously, me as well. Why not? Because, you know, there's the political will that we are speaking about. It's very clear that the reason is that the foreign investors are not really feeling that they're welcomed here, you know. They don't really feel that their money will be safe here, you know. That's the main problem. It's not the CCP clearing and settlement and so on. That's all nice, but that's the way if you talk about what makes a store successful. Of course it has to have a parking space, of course it has to have nice shelves, but if you don't have a good products on the shelves, nobody will come to you.
Mr. Rojec, Mr. Stanovnik, would you agree with the proposals for the new minister?
No, listen, I mean, the situation for the government definitely is difficult and it's not so simple. I mean, you know, because it's like at the beginning of transition, they should act on all the fronts, you know. On the one hand, certainly they should reduce salaries. They should freeze all employment in the public sector. But on the other hand, I mean, you need to do these structural reforms, you know. I mean, pension reform, labor market reform, and even. I mean, I think it's an illusion if you think, okay, let's make this banking system, let's clean it up, make a bad bank, and everything will be okay, and the banks will again begin to give loans. But it's not like that, because you have very indebted companies, you know, and these companies have so high in-debt ratios, you know, that. I think a lot of them have so high in debt leverages that no normal bank could or would give them loans, you know. So it's not that you should begin to clean the banks, but you should also begin to help companies to improve these situations, of course. So. What to do? It's a very difficult thing. But I mean, if we talk, and here we talk about foreign investment, I mean, I agree fully with you. You know, selling now when you have a lot of better banks probably on the market in other countries is very difficult. But there's no other option. I still think maybe the insurance companies are good. Telecommunication. You have companies which are good, and I think that we at least should do several good privatization deals. We have breweries, we have retail chains. You know, several transparent and good privatization deals should be done, should be realized to show the world that we are serious about it. And then also, I think this can attract other capital. It may also attract capital which are in the households at home, you know, because the people don't believe now. That's why. And I think there is you would know better, but there's certainly a lot of money at home and in the banks which should be potentially used as yeah.
Yeah, that's just sorry, just a minute. Yeah, that is a good point. But you know, the problem when the government is a shareholder or the main shareholder in three largest banks, would you want in your banks that the people would start withdrawing the deposits at this moment and putting it into shares? So that's maybe one of the reasons why portfolio investors will not be included into privatizations.
Mr. Stanovnik, you wanted to add it?
Just one idea for finance minister, because of the export of capital, official data of Bank of Slovenia is that transactions into Luxembourg in the last 5-6 years were 10 billion euros, and then in Cyprus about 1.5 billion. I'm not saying that this is money laundering, but or this is based on the goods flows, but I think this is a really a very, very bad message that we should do anything to attract that this capital would come back.
Okay. I think it's time to get a question from the audience.
Could the role of the stock exchange be intensified or made more effective in this privatization process?
Yeah, obviously, but still, you know, it's up to the government to decide how they want to sell their shares. Up to now, only privatization of 2 companies, Nova KBM and Savare, were done as an IPOs. So the stock exchange was basically used for that. All other privatization were done through so-called tender procedures, and a lot of them finished without any results. And not only that, you know, for me, it's not even the biggest problem that you have a tender with a lot of companies attending and then at the end you decide not to sell. The problem is that while the selling procedures are going on, the politicians come up with new and new criteria, and when they see which companies are at the end of the process, even after the binding bids were submitted, the new criteria come so that, you know, we don't really like this company that is at the end of the process. And that's the biggest problem. I really doubt that the stock exchange will be used this time because of the situation with government banks. So if for instance, Telekom Slovenia would be privatized through the stock exchange, that transaction would be probably worth about 800, 900, maybe even €1 billion. If at this moment, companies and private individuals would start withdrawing the deposits in that amount from Slovenian banks, that would be a huge problem for them. Huge problem. So that I think that the government will not risk that and basically have an argument that the strategic investor will pay more for the companies and sell it that way, unfortunately.
Any other? Yeah, sir.
I don't really follow your reasoning about privatization in reality, because I've studied this in a number of countries, and based on that I have 2 questions. The first concerning the state-owned banks, where I tend to believe that this is a little like the joke where the punchline is that you can't be just a little pregnant. That is, you can't leave the government as partly holding the bank, because everybody will know that if that is the situation, management will not do anything without running to the Ministry of Finance and ask first. That we have experienced in a number of countries. Then I'm a little surprised over your pessimistic approach to allowing the private retail investors to come in, because if you keep them out, you end up in a political and moral problem about the pricing, because they are out of being part of the growth potential that is in the privatized company. And I would rather believe that what you should do is actually to use professional investors to get the market-related price, but say from the beginning that a portion of this, say a third or something, will be allocated to the small investors. And I'm not at all afraid that they shall remove their deposits and use that. You have a lot of money which is not parked in the bank, inside and outside Slovenia. So a combination there may be the right thing, considering also that if you sell a government company in the market and get a price for it, taxpayers basically change a real asset to a financial asset. They get out of this imbalance. And those who step in, private investors or professional ones, do it because they see an upside in it, and they shall profit on that.
Mr. Mastnak, Mr. Rojec.
Well, from my side, I couldn't agree more. I'm just commenting what I think that the government will do. I said that I clearly believe that in the next 10 years, the competitive advantage of any country will be the ability to get to fresh capital, to raise capital. If we sell 5, 6 of our largest companies to strategic investors, we will definitely kill the capital market as it is. So I'm definitely against on doing that. I think that private investors should be part of this privatization, but at this moment, I don't see anyone really supporting that idea. I never saw any comments in the media that would supportive to this idea, and if you could speak to our Prime Minister, that would be really, really great. Okay, maybe you should again.
Mr. Rojec, Mr. Stanovnik, maybe a comment.
No, I agree completely with that, but also, and I think that I mean, I don't know, but I think that the government has strategic investors in mind now with all these things. I mean, I didn't see any discussions in the government or so on to attract retail investors. So the idea is, I mean, if we will sell, then let's sell to strategic investors, because then we can get also the premia. This is a very frequent argument. Yes, but I still think, I mean, we should do as you said. You know, there were privatization procedures, but then they kept changing conditions during it, and immediately you saw that at the end nothing will happen. I think that in the case of Mercator, this is the biggest retailer. This happened 2 or 3 times. You know, there were really good offers and everything. You know, but from the beginning, that's why I think, you know, to have a couple of really transparent and good privatizations would give a good message, you know, and then you can begin to think of different things. And I think that then everybody, not everybody, a lot of people will begin to think in different terms, in small investors, you know. Also the people then, I think, will be more keen if they will see that the deals are actually possible. But now, as it is, I think that there is definitely the issue is the lack of confidence, you know, on all the parts. And as you say, I mean, that a lot of money went out. And as I said, also the improvement of investment climate and everything, it's not just to attract foreign investors, but to, let's say, destimulate local domestic firms to go out, you know, simply because they feel that the climate and the situation is better outside. So there are both sides, I think. Yeah.
Any other question from the audience? Okay, we'll slowly wrap it up. So, as a last comment, we've started with the competitives. Let's also end with that. Your comment: how do you see Slovenia in the next 5 to 10 years, and how do you see our competitiveness index?
Well, I think that we have potential, we have human capital, we have another very good, as was mentioned today, geographic position, really, and I think when the crisis is over, I think the recovery can be done, but not very quickly. I think that this potential should be exploited by the right people in the government, by the right people in the management of the enterprises, and also by the reforming public sector.
Okay. Mr. Rojec?
Well, I think if you want the opportunities for foreign investors, I think definitely privatizations, you know, then certainly I think in the future there will be some infrastructure deals, you know, in the energy sector, I mean, railroad, maybe through BOT or some, but definitely something will have to happen. Then in the country, in spite of all this criticism, you have quite a large number of successful successful foreign enterprises which act as export platforms, and if you interview them, a number of them are very happy, especially with human capital, with workers, and so on and so on. And you have quite a number of centers of excellence by some quite reputable foreign firms here. So there are possibilities, and as Peter said, there is human capital. So this definitely, I think, is one of the opportunities. Then what didn't happen in the past, which I always thought could be one of opportunity for Slovenia, is to act as a kind of regional headquarters for South and Eastern Europe. And if there will be, if this process of EU enlargement will go further on in the region, this may become more important. Then if you ask me what to do to attract more FDI, I think definitely speeding up privatization, all the structural reforms which are necessary to improve the situation in the economy for domestic and for foreign investors, improving the business climate in general. As I said a little bit before, I see some business zones as a kind of shortcut here, so I think that the state could improve this by really creating, I don't know, 4 or 5 business zones. Not that with the idea to give some huge investment incentives, but simply to offer a good business environment there. And then at the end, if you ask me what the FDI agency should do, I think that 2 things. I mean that the FDI agency should be allowed to combine various incentives from all the ministries and to create this attractive tailor-made packages. And the second, I think that we should introduce a kind of this contractual status of some for foreign investors, for big foreign investment projects.
Okay, Mr. Mastnak.
Well, very clearly, the main thing is to change our focus. Right now, I think if you would ask a lot of Slovenians what is our biggest, I don't know, national goal in economics, it would be that we should hold as much of Slovenian economy as possible. We should change that focus, that our goal should be that to maximize growth without any further indebtedness and no inflation or something like that. At the end of the day, also, all that we want is to work at successful companies and to receive similar pay that our peers do in Western Europe. Unfortunately, if we want to do that, we have to have a functioning financial and capital market, and we have to let foreign or international capital into the country. Once we will make this decision, I think everything else will not be easy. It will take a lot of time. But this is the biggest step that awaits us. And once this happens, I think that we are able to attract foreign investors, portfolio and strategic. We are able to build our pension system better than it is right now, to build institutional investors in Slovenia, and that will be able to buy and then trade shares on the secondary market, so that it will be much better for you guys as well to trade on it. I think that Ljubljana Stock Exchange made a very good first step by listing or intend to list Slovenian shares on Austrian market. But that, of course, by itself doesn't mean anything. If the decisions that we were all mentioning by the politics will not be met, this will be only a very, very little step that will not lead to anything. So I think that there is a good perspective, but some decisions have to be made and have to be made very, very soon.
Okay. Well, on behalf of IAPTI, I would like to thank to the audience for attending the panel, and I would like to thank to the panelists for joining the panel as well. I really sincerely hope that you have received some useful information, and let's hope that you also make a business decision to invest in Slovenia. Thank you once again from our side.
Well, I think that the main obstacles for foreign investors, for more foreign investors in Slovenia, are totally the same for foreign enterprises as well as for domestic. for domestic enterprises, and that is rigid labor market, high taxes, payment arrears, and the whole set of determinants of a good business climate. So I think if we would like to attract more FDI, the number one message would be first to realize a couple of really transparent privatization deals to improve the business climate, and as a kind of shortcut, this could be also done by establishing several state-owned business zones.
YAPT is an implementation agency of the Republic of Slovenia. So what we do, our main mission is attracting foreign investors to Slovenia, and of course we do a lot of activities on the foreign markets, and also we have certain stimulus packages. So we have also special tenders, special financial incentives that we can offer to foreign investors. What we find positive about the whole thing, the FDI stock in Slovenia is constantly growing. Despite the crisis, it has remained a constant positive growth, except the year of 2009. And what's positive about the whole thing is that foreign investors, through the public tender for financial incentives, so through the FDI cost-sharing grant scheme, show a great interest in investing in Slovenia. And what we lack currently now is the financial means to support them. There is interest from the side of foreign investors in manufacturing activity, in strategic services and research and development. And that's what's good for Slovenia, and let's hope that this trend will continue also in the future.
The share of foreign enterprises in our exports and imports is about 40%, what says that foreign enterprises are quite an important actor in Slovenia. And all the analysis show that foreign enterprises are actually doing better than domestic enterprises, so they can improve our competitiveness, they can contribute to the upgrading of our competitiveness. And that is basically the reason because of which we should try to attract more FDI.
The panel was addressing different issues: Slovene competitiveness on one hand, strategic investors on the other side, and portfolio investors. What was important in the panel is that, of course, we were losing our position in the competitiveness index, and of course that makes a signal. So something needs to be done. And let's say some economists that joined us the panel were addressing that issue. Then we have the issue of the strategic investors. That's what also, let's say, our agency is doing. We try to attract those kind of investors. And the last issue that has remained open is, of course, the issue of portfolio investors. That's what's the huge debate, what is in Slovenia. So it's a debate about how to, let's say, what you do with the state-owned companies, what you do with the new holding, and of course the economists try to address those issues. Of course, there are certain things we have to say that are not the best. There are also negative signals as well, but what we want to say is that, of course, at the end of the day, we'll try to make a positive signal to the investors, and let's hope that certain deals will be done, and Slovenia, of course, will gain out of this whole process.